Dr. Paul Conant dropped by our studios to update our viewers on the amazing success that scientists are having worldwide in their fight to educate governments and the population to the deadly toxic waste poison, fluoride, being added to our water.
This has been an 8-year effort on our part to demonstrate that they cannot introduce this sulfuryl fluoride for the treatment of food in warehouses and processing plants because our kids are already exceeding the reference dose, the safe dose.
Dr. Paul H. Conant is our guest, and he is an environmental chemist and, of course, a toxicologist, and has been a prominent critic in the U.S. and around the world since he first researched exactly what the so-called substance fluoride is doing, being added to our water, but also being used as a pesticide. And we had him in here just 4 or 5 months ago in studio with us. And since then, so many positive things have happened. And I wanted to get him on to discuss. The EPA has proposed a phase out of fluoride-based pesticides. That's the New York Times. Other reports, U.S. wants to reduce fluoride in drinking water. The government's had to continue to admit that internal ingestion of fluoride does nothing for your teeth. It's only topical, and I've made the point many times, it's like drinking sunscreen instead of just putting it topically on. And so there's major cracks in the facade. He's just returned to the United States from a trip to Australia, New Zealand, and other nations. He just got back last night, and he's here in Austin, Texas tomorrow to speak to the Austin City Council. So positive things are happening all over the world, and he's here to give us a report on that. Dr. Conant, thanks for coming in.
Well, thank you, Alex. You know, water fluoridation is not the most important issue confronting our planet, but it's the easiest one to end. All you need is a strong wrist to turn off the tap. Once the tap is turned off, it's over. But you need the political will to turn the tap off, and to get that political will, we need people informed and we need people organized. Thanks to you, millions of people around the world are being informed on this issue, and thanks to Fluoride-Free Texas, thousands of people in the city of Austin are being informed about the issue and being organized on the issue. So we're keeping our fingers crossed that Austin, Texas will be our next big victory. A few days ago, it was finalized that Calgary in Alberta, that's 1.1 million people, are now going to be fluoride-free, and after 20 years. And people in Waterloo, Ontario, voted it out. So the squeeze is on Ontario. And don't forget that most of British Columbia and most of Quebec, the wings of Canada, are already fluoridation-free. And we're squeezing on Alberta with Calgary out, Edmonton may be next, and then we're squeezing on Ontario. If Ontario was to go, if Toronto was to go, or even Ottawa was to go, I think it would be the end of fluoridation in Canada. Meanwhile, we've got a very good organizing group in New Zealand. FAN New Zealand is excellent, and FAN Australia has just been formed. So there's a fight back everywhere. And then a few days ago, I was in Dublin, which is mandatory fluoridation. Because of American pressure back in the 1960s, Ireland has mandatory fluoridation. It's the odd man out in Europe. Only 3 countries in Europe have any fluoridation at all. England at 10%, Spain at 3%, and Ireland at 73%. But lots of people in Ireland don't want this fluoride in their water. But many other people don't know it's there.
Now, you've been talking about some of the big cities that are going fluoride-free. I've seen reports like towns outside Austin, like Lago Vista,
right,
having it removed. Other cities not putting it in. Big fights in places like San Diego, where they've had to bring in supposed private money to do it. I briefly want to give people a recap of just some of the basics of the danger of fluoridation and how discredited it's gotten and what it signifies for you that this facade of you people are crazy is beginning to fall in, because I've seen the reports of the majority of government scientists and unions sending in their own letters, toxicologists, environmental chemists, saying this is insane. The increases in bone cancer, the fracturing of the bones, the dental fluorosis. I mean, it's such a hoax. But before we go there, you also gave me some very positive news earlier when we were talking about what's happening in the state of Georgia.
Yes, some very prominent black leaders. Andrew Young, former ambassador to the UN, former mayor of Atlanta, whose father was a dentist and for years was pro-fluoridation, came out with a public statement a few days ago calling for an end to mandatory fluoridation in Georgia. And the reason is that they're now finding that black children are much more sensitive, appear to be much more sensitive to fluoride for a number of factors. For example, the rates of dental fluorosis, which is caused by fluoride, mottling of the teeth, is greater for black children and Hispanic children than it is for white children. But the parents are not being warned. You know, in terms of the basics, probably the single most basic fact that anybody needs to know is the level of fluoride in mother's milk. You know, what was developed over millions of years by evolution, Mother Nature, however you saw the development of humankind, this is baby's first meal, which is designed to be the best delivery of all the things that the body needs, right? And it's practically none. The level of fluoride in mother's milk is 0.004 parts per million, which means a bottle-fed baby is getting, in a fluoridated town like Austin, is getting 250 times more fluoride than nature intended. And then you have these lunatics, these people that are more interested in money than protecting our babies or our health, selling for baby water, so-called purified water, which has fluoride added to it. So they're deliberately giving babies 250 times more fluoride than nature intended.
And they push it in the public schools. They've got dozens of brands. They've got it in packages, little school buses on the side. You go to grocery stores or baby stores, there's giant end caps. They've got recordings playing. Your baby needs it. They've got to have it. But you just broke down the facts, and I've read the statistics. Go over some of them. Am I correct, doctor, that the studies show these different fluoride types have a much more adverse effect on babies and the developing?
Yes, it's the first year which is the most sensitive year. According to government-funded researchers from Iowa, it's the first year in which the baby's at greatest risk at developing dental fluorosis. And we've got a huge problem now in the United States. 41% of children between the age of 12 and 15 now have dental fluorosis. Now that's all American kids. That's an average of kids living in fluoridated communities and non-fluoridated.
And that's up from 10%.
10% was where they began in 1945. That's what they thought. We can fluoridate the water, lower at 1 part per million, lower tooth decay, and we'll keep the dental fluorosis at 10% in its very mild form. Now we have 41%, probably 50% in fluoridated communities, and 3.6% of those have moderate or severe dental fluorosis.
And from the studies I've read, but correct me if I'm wrong, this is the surface effect. And so this is what we're seeing, but the studies on IQs, on bones, bone cancer.
You can't see them unless you do a study. You can't walk down a road and tell if someone's had brain damage, whether their IQ's lowered, whether they earlier onset of puberty or any of these other things. You can only find that was caused or not by fluoride if you do the studies. And we're just not doing the studies in this country. We're not doing any studies to see if there's a relationship between fluoridation and arthritis, even though we know the first symptoms of fluoride poisoning of the bone is just like arthritis. We're not looking to see if there's a relationship between fluoridation and the massive increase of underactive thyroid gland. Even though doctors used to give fluoride tablets to lower thyroid function in the 30s, 40s, and 50s, very low doses, by the way. We're not looking to see if there's a relationship with fluoridation and lowered IQ, even though we have 24 studies now from China, India, Iran, and Mexico, which shows that moderate exposure to fluoride is lowering IQ in children.
Well, that was my next point. You're saying we're not studying it because this is the home of fluoride where it began. You live here in the United States as well, but all these other countries have. And we know that the teeth turning into pot-eaten, yellow wrecks, that's only the surface effect, the brain.
That's right.
What about glands in the brain?
Yeah, the pineal gland, this little gland between the two hemispheres of the brain, it concentrates fluoride because it's a calcifying tissue, just like the teeth and the bones. And the researcher that did this, somebody I've met several times, Dr. Jennifer Luke in England, she also showed that animals lowered melatonin production. And this pineal gland produces melatonin, which is like a biological clock. It controls the start of different things or end of different. It controls the onset of puberty, aging, jet lag, which I know something about, and sleep patterns. So it's an incredibly important gland, and yet no country, no fluoridating country, has attempted to reproduce her work, and it's not.
But strangely enough, in the studies I've seen, levels of fluoride are known to accelerate puberty and basically aging, and then we wonder why, amongst the other hormones and things that are in the meat, that our girls are going into puberty at now not just 6 or 7 or 8, but 3 years old in many cases, you see the areas of the world where fluoridation is going on. We have these hot spots of the boys being effeminate and the women going into puberty earlier.
But the point is, from a scientific perspective, if you don't look, you don't find. And the absence of study does not mean the absence of harm. And unfortunately, what is being done in the United States, particularly by the Center of Disease Control, is to essentially say, oh, we're not finding any effects at 1 part per million. Well, you're not looking. I know you're a fan of Monty Python, as I am. And we had Dr. Peter Cooney, who's the chief dental officer for Canada. He went into Dryden, Ontario, shortly before they voted fluoridation out. That's another victory. He says, I've walked down your high street today and I didn't see anybody growing horns, and you've been fluoridated for 40 years. So that's the level of research in Canada. You know, come in, John Cleese. Well, John, what are we going to do to study this fluoridation thing? How can we demonstrate to the public?
He doesn't have any horns. He's
fine.
fine.
We'll have a whole department. We'll have a specialist in deer horns, moose horns, goat horns, bull horns, cow horns,
Rabbit horns.
We'll cover the country. And
if we see horns growing, we'll cut that fluoride out.
That's it, John. Jolly good, you got it. You got it whole of one.
What about forked tails as well?
Yes, you forked tails, absolutely. And by the way, John, what do you think about getting rid of this hazardous waste from the phosphate fertilizer industry?
Well, we'll just put it in the water, and if they complain, we'll say, if Easter bunnies spontaneously appear, then we'll take it out.
So you got it. I mean, can you think of anything more bizarre? The hazardous waste of the superphosphate fertilizer industry, they can't dump it into the sea by international law. They can't dump it locally because it's too concentrated. But if someone buys it from them, it becomes a product. And once it's a product, then they can put it in the drinking water and tell us it's good for our teeth.
Well, expanding on that, I mean, you say they haven't studied it here, but there have been studies all over the world, and there have been studies of what higher levels of fluoride do, and we know it's deadly poison and it attacks the body at every level. I mean, you've spoken about how it's really an adjuvant. It also accelerates all the other toxins, and if it's something that bioaccumulates, then we do know it's bad.
It's crazy. Well, first of all, going back to real basic common sense stuff, the whole notion of using the public drinking water to deliver medicine is crazy, because once you put a medicine in the water, you can't control the dose. You can control the concentration at the waterworks, but you can't control how much water people drink, and you can't control how much fluoride they're getting from other sources, so you can't control the dose. Ask any pharmacist. This is sheer lunacy.
But that's my next point. You were earlier when we were talking on the radio breaking down how they gas the food with fluoride, and they also have systems where they spray it on.
Yeah.
And many of the doctors I've talked to over the years said, look, water's bad, but this is where they're really putting the toxic waste. Well, now, going back to January
10th.
Absolutely, of this year, 4 or 5 months ago, EPA proposes phase out of fluoride-based pesticide because we're dealing with hundreds of times what they're putting in the water. But the fact that they're now starting to back off on this, why do you think that's happening?
Well, it was an amazing victory for the Fluoride Action Network with help from the Environmental Working Group and Beyond Pesticides. This has been an 8-year effort on our part to demonstrate that they cannot introduce this sulfurofluoride for the treatment of food in warehouses and processing plants because our kids are already exceeding the reference dose, the safe dose. We know that. They're already overexposed to fluoride. So the way the pesticide division works, they establish a reference dose, and the combination of the pesticides plus the background must not exceed the reference dose. But if you're exceeding the reference dose before you've added a speck of the pesticide, then clearly you can't do it. They try to change...
Again, fluoride as a pesticide.
Yeah.
Because it's so good for our children.
This
is hiding in plain view.
We need to give the children a pesticide. What type of conspiracy theorist are you? I don't see no whores going there, Governor.